This is the second lesson in the Laughing Frog Pottery online school. Today what we're going to do is basically look at centering. I'm going to initially start off centering a ball of clay which is about 500 grams. Then I'm going to center a ball of clay which is 100 grams, and then in the final thing will be a ball of clay that's 2 kilos. So I'm going to show you the way that I change my centering technique to adapt to the difference in scale between my hands and the ball of clay. The first thing I want to do is to talk a little bit about some of the terms I'll use. In your hand, my mate George in Reno told me that this section of your hand is called the thenar, the muscles in that area, and I use that a lot, and I'll refer to that a lot whilst I'm throwing. This section here is known as the hypothenar, and I'll use that a bit in this, especially when I'm centering the larger pieces of clay. So first off, for those who are really, I'll cover some really basic stuff. The wheel head should be damp but not wet. If it's too wet, it won't. The ball of clay won't stick. If the wheel head's too dry, then it won't stick either. So I usually just squeegee it off with my thumb and then throw it on. So as I showed in the first introduction to throwing video, for a ball of clay like this, I basically use my right arm is fixed on my elbow and pushing it in towards the centre. So in that case you can see I'm using that section of my palm there. My left hand is coming on the outside, and I'm going to bring the vertical section from the thenar down to the hypothenar to squeeze inwards, not rising, lifting my hand, but squeezing in and allowing the top to be open so the clay will rise up into a column. Then I lift the thenar of my hand over the top, raise my right hand to connect so that both hands are joined together, and push downwards with the thenar. So the ideal in this, situation is the thenar is my hand is travelling from the centre of the wheel to a point on the edge, providing a downward pressure in that area. And my right hand is catching that clay as it's squeezed down. So it's essentially in this squeezing down process that the centering process occurs. Once again, I'll just repeat something from the other video. If I'm applying pressure at any time, I'm distorting the clay. So if I take my hand away quickly, even though that clay feels like it's on centre, the pressure from my hands will leave the clay distorted. So I have to remove that pressure gently over a couple of revolutions of the wheel head, so that the pressure is able to adapt easily. So to show you how that happens, if I push downwards with my hand like that and take it away quickly, you can see how it's left off centre. If I remove my hand slowly, you can see how the clay moves back into centre. As I see the process of centering, there's actually two functions that are occurring in this. The first function is to get the clay evenly distributed around the centre of the wheel, so that when I open it up, I've got an even wall thickness. The second thing is to actually give me information about the interior of the clay. In a sense, it's a continuation of the kneading process. So in order to get the clay on centre, what I actually see myself as doing here is providing a profile around the clay that forces the clay, so that the clay's got nowhere to go but to be on centre. So my right hand is applying a pressure with this section of my palm in there, fixed against either my thigh or on the wheel head, depending on the rim of the wheel, depending on your particular wheel. My left hand is fixed on the back of those the fingers there on the outside, so that it's the clay's trailing past there. I don't want the clay catching on those fingers. And that's squeezing upwards. And then as I'm coming down, the thenar here is pushing downwards gently, and my right hand is catching that, providing a sort of a catching pressure as I force the clay down. One of the important things is that my hand's actually acting as one unit. If both hands are acting independently, then it's much harder to get that clay to go on the centre. There's all sorts of different ways that people centre clay, and I'm providing, but essentially they're all about providing this profile around the outside of the clay that forces it on the centre. Some people, if your wrists are a bit sore when you're applying a pressure like that, you can perhaps pull backwards and apply that same function by drawing the clay back towards yourself. And if you're looking on the internet, you'll find there's lots of different ways that people centre. So that's the first centering process that I wanted to show. The second is for a smaller amount of clay. I've just taken that ball of clay off. If this pad is dry and there's no water on it, I can just throw the next ball of clay directly on top of that, and it should stick quite easily. So for a small amount of clay like this, I can't really get my hand around it like that. So what I do in this situation is bring my left hand on the out around it, so that I'm actually embracing the clay in my hand and pushing downwards with the thenar of my left hand. And then if I bring a sponge in my right hand and push into that section there, so my hands are locked together, just resting at the back there, I can push inwards with a sponge, and that'll have that function of raising that up and then pushing it down. So I can centre small amounts of clay much easier using this technique than I can try to use both hands. And doing this, you can do it for much smaller amounts of clay as well, like if you try to throw knobs on casserole lids, or centering a piece of clay to throw a knob out of. It would be the technique that I'd suggest for doing that. The third technique I'm going to show is for a larger amount of clay. I've got to get the wheel head dry. So this is 2 kilos, if I can lift it up. With a larger amount of clay, the first thing is probably doesn't hurt to just pat it a little bit and get it on the centre as much as possible. If you're having trouble centering larger amounts of clay, check the height of your seat in relation to the wheel head. If your seat's too low, it makes it a lot harder because you're kind of pushing upwards against the clay. if your seats, my seat here is probably 2 inches or 50 mil below the height of the wheel, and what that enables me to do is to get up over the top of the clay and apply a downward pressure in an easier manner. For a larger amount of clay, the first thing I do is, rather than trying to centre like this, where I'm having to use more of a physical action that way or around there, I bring the heels of my hands together so that they're touching at the back and lean into it, using my fingers to apply a bit of pressure there, so that I'm locking in against my body, using my body mass to control that the clay so it's not forcing me around. Then I'll lift my left hand up so that it's close to the top, and I'm going to lift my right hand over the top, and I'm going to use the hypothenar section, the muscles here, across that top. So you can see I'm locking my hands together so that it acts as one unit. But I'm pushing not right across the top, I'm pushing again from the centre to the edge. This position enables me to get my shoulder weight up above the clay, so that rather than using muscles, I'm using my mass to force that clay downwards. Again, it's important that you keep both hands locked together. If they were acting independently, then it's much harder to get that clay centered. One thing that I find is if I apply that pressure more across the centre, and if I lift upwards more with my hands, I get a hollow developing in the centre of the clay. Which I don't want. And so the reason I have my hand at that angle and it's only dealing from the centre of the clay to the edge is to control that surface so that it's got a slight dome in the middle. When I finish, I might finish off on centre. I might just put a slight depression with the side of my thumb there, so that I can open up for makes it just a little bit easier to open up. Thank you. That's the demonstration on centering. The next video that we'll put up will be about the next two stages, sort of a continuation of centering throughout the throwing process. So centering the ring of clay that's been opened up for a cylinder, and then centering the rim of a cylinder if it's going off centre whilst you're throwing. Thank you.